began, we saw the sources of the two scenarios of redemption, right? We saw that to quickly summarize it, the miraculous, all at once, all complete, all perfect. The Jews are back in Israel after 2,000 years of separation and scattering. Find ourselves right away. Everything is beautiful. The Beit HaMikdash, the temple, everyone is holy and perfect. Or the other scenario, we saw in the Gemara, the Tanakh, and the prophecies of what we call the natural developmental process, historical development, stage by stage, slowly, not perfect all at once, developing. And we discussed that in the background of, you see on the right, the left side of Kalash Rav Gutmach, we read how through the exile, the option of the supernatural redemption, the majestic all at once redemption became the predominant expectation, almost exclusively. We're waiting for the redemption, right? They're looking in the heavens. The guy taps him on the back. Here I am, the Mashiach. No, don't bother me. I'm waiting for the Mashiach, looking in the heavens. And therefore the inability to see so much, to perceive when things take place in a natural fashion, in human development, in human participation, political maneuvering. Where I'm waiting for the Mashiach. We'll see the sources to talk about. But Avkala Shiva, Gutmacher, and others that we mentioned, right, it is wrong to believe, whatever, they're coming to amend this misconception, to try to explain to people and realize and to show how it comes through. We mentioned even here the well-disposed Gentile leaders will view favorably the return of the Jews to the Holy Land. We mentioned that was like last week, November 2nd, Balfour Declaration, 1917, how it comes through human and even political things, very mundane, seemingly, especially for those that are expecting the holy, the divine, so to speak. So we said divine, that's what we said. The question is, when you say divine means it's through miracles in the heaven, or the same divine that also works through these human and participation, as we'll see the sources for it. But what we explained again last week was more on the right side, the introduction by the publishers of Em Havanim Smecha, why it was, or how it became that the majority of the masses thought of or expecting this miraculous redemption. We said that the prophets and other sources talk about two options. There's a lot more to talk about, but we saw there two explanations of the historical reality. That the reality dictated such that it was impossible any other way. The fact, the ability, the Jews were without a state, without a land, without a government, without an army, without any possibility. The Jews were in the pale of settlement. They couldn't even live outside of certain things. And you're talking about we're going to capture the land of Israel, reconquer it, come back to the land, and build the temple, etc. It seems so impossible. And the reality was such that the only option that seemed possible was miraculous. What God will bring it about.
Isn't taking it back through like force? I heard something about the 3 oaths.
We'll talk about that. We have a lot to do. I'm just summarizing this last week to go on. We have to move on. The other explanation was, he said, the first few hundred years in the exile there in Bavel, you're right across the border. It's not so impossible to imagine a practical return. You get on a donkey and you go back there to Israel. But he said that the last 100 years, in other words, after 400, 500, 1,000, 2,000 years of exile, all these concepts of kingdom and sovereignty became mystified, became otherworldly, became like, how can that be? Like I said, only through miraculous divine intervention, without any help from our part. Not because they didn't believe that it was impossible. It was we got so detached, he said, from real politics, he says here. Again, that's what we saw last week. And also on the background of the false Mashiachs. These false Mashiachs, these messianic movements, Frank and Shabtai before that led the Jews to...
Jacob Frank?
Yeah, Yaakov Frank, yeah. To all these things of misleading the Jews and saying, we mentioned how the reaction, whether rabbinic or more maybe the natural defense mechanism, the Jews said, leave that to God. Leave the redemption to God. When he deems fit, when he seems proper, that he will bring us back without any help on your part. You just sit back, be a good Jew, be a religious Jew, use the mitzvot, and then God will bring you back. Leave the Mashiach to God. So he says how all the thoughts of the study, of the learning of the Geulah, how it will be, how in the future, don't deal with that. Leave that. We see what happens when you start getting involved with that. There's other reasons also, maybe we'll get to, of how this concept or this expectation of the miraculous took place. But I think we got up to the Evan Ezra, the last source on the sheet. Everyone has the sheet, which will explain a little bit, how can it be? Like, how come now that it is possible to come back to the land? So what happened? Why don't people just now The means are now available. I think we got up to here. So the Ibn Ezra writes in the Shemot, one of the classic commentators, writes in 900 years ago. It is commented Shemot when the Jews leave Egypt. They are chased by who? Who's chasing them when they leave Egypt?
Pharaoh.
Pharaoh, but how many?
So,
Right, they had their chariots chasing the Jews, and the Jews were afraid. He stood up in there, he said they were afraid. The Ibn Ezra asks, where it's underlined, why will a great camp of 600,000 men, besides the women and children, millions of people, but the men, the fighting, these military able men, 600,000 mirodfim, why would they be afraid of those that are chasing them? A few chariots, a few hundred. Why shouldn't they turn and fight for their souls and for their children? And then the tshuva, again, which is so important to understand the psychology here. The answer is, Ki ha-mitzrim hayu adonim l'Yisrael. The Egyptians were the masters of the Jews. They were the masters and the Jews were the slaves. But v'zeh hador hayotze mitzrayim lamad minurav lisbol ol Mitzrayim. These Jews that were born in Egypt, that were born in generations, that were born slaves, never knew what freedom is, doesn't know that mentality of being, and they had this nefesh shvela. Nefesh shvela, like a lowly mentality, call it a slave mentality. A slave mentality, B'chal you have to understand, how do you have a slave? You have one master and, 50 slaves. Why don't they all just get together and jump on him and overtake him? It doesn't even dawn on them. A slave mentality is not a matter of IQ, it's not a matter of, it's just this psychological makeup which blocks this even the thought of going over and taking over. The Jews had this mentality of being slaves for 210 years, whatever. There's this, they couldn't even dawn on them like it to attack their masters. How can they now fight against their masters? They weren't trained, they weren't able to deal with warfare. And that's why Hashem turned it around, that the whole generation that was leaving Egypt, the males that don't have this power to fight the Knanim, they won't be able to fight the 31 kings that they'll need to fight when they conquer Eretz Yisrael. They're not able to, not physically. They give them guns, whatever. No, the mentality, they'll see the enemy and they'll freeze again. And therefore God turned it around, right? The sin of the spies caused it, but the deeper, the hashgacha, that ad shekam dor acher dor midbar, until a new generation will rise up, shalora ugalut, that never saw exile. Don't know what it means to be afraid. What? Here's the enemy. Go attack him. What do you mean? They had this lofty soul, this different mentality. In psychology, any psychologists here?
No.
No one knows, basic psych.
I began majoring in psychology.
In 1960, 65, 67, there was someone called Martin Seligman who came up with this understanding of what's called learned helplessness. Anyone heard of learned helplessness? I have maybe the article. You can look it up in.
Yeah, it's when you convince yourself that you can't really.
Convince yourself, or the situation causes. I'll read you the definition. How he defines it. It's a long story. I don't want to get to it. We have so much to do yet. It's sort of condition of a human being or an animal in which it has learned to behave helplessly, even when the opportunity is restored for it to help itself by avoiding an unpleasant or harmful circumstance. They give a shock to a dog. It's a long time. I don't want to limit.
It's like tying an elephant at a young age they tie their feet for X amount of time when they're young, so that they're trained to be obedient in the future, because they can just crumble things. So when they're young, they're still weak, and small.
Here's the effect of, they gave them a shock. The dog would, have to, training to jump over a gate to get the food. So he learned that the food, you get the food if you open the gate. So he learns how to open the gate. Then he gives them a shock. So every time he tries to open, he gets the shock. So he stops trying. And then when they don't give the shock anymore, the gate is open, whatever, he doesn't even try anymore. That's the experiment, etc. A description of the effect of inescapable punishment, which brings apathy and submission prevail, causing the individual to rely fully on others for help, or on God, let's call it in this case. In other words, this slave mentality, this learned helplessness, again, the Ibn Ezra way before the Martin Seligman and others, but the phenomenon of the slave mentality, it prevents any thought, of the ability to rise up and to do it, to take the things into your own hands. It becomes this passive mentality. If you saw the movie on Sobibor, the prison camp. No, it's a concentration camp. Anyway, it's not a long story, but you saw the movie? No.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, a few people, one of the Russian prisoners who was also wasn't the slave mentality, and the few other Jews prisoners, they made their plan to revolt. They made some type of weapons and guns, and the right time came. The Jews were on the roll call, and they shot the guards, and they told everyone to run. They opened the gates, and only have a few seconds. The other guards will come. They didn't kill everyone, right? So they have the gates are open. You have to run, and the Jews just stood there. The roll call is standing there. They didn't get the order yet that they're allowed to move. And this wasn't 200 years of slavery, whatever. The Germans knew how to take away their humanity, so to speak, this mentality, giving them numbers, etc. But nevertheless, that short time that they made them into this learned helplessness, they didn't even try. There's another someone that was here, visited, R.A. Leibovich. He writes also how he ran away from escaped different trains. He jumped off the train. They ran to the forest in Katowice. Anyway, they caught them. They caught 90 of us that we escaped to the forest. The next day, the Samal, how do you say the Samal, the sergeant, whatever, put us into a big room. He went away for an hour or two. Apparently to drink something. When he came back with his Luger, Hebrew, the translating. He started shooting everyone in the back of their necks, one by one. We were all sitting there on the floor without any response. 43 of us were just sitting there, and he shot one by one. And Aryeh stops for a second in this interview, and he says, "It's when I think about this, it drives me crazy. We were 90 of us, and he was alone. How is it that we didn't? Why is it we just didn't jump on him and attack him? The Meshagelti drives him crazy." He said about himself, that no one even thought of doing so. Why? This slave mentality. That's just an example, or maybe the Rambam also writes about how he's talking here about idolatry and changing mindsets, changing ideas. That people don't change an idea overnight. But he gives this example also, like the Ibn Ezra, about the Jews leaving Egypt. How you can't just change. It's contrary to man's nature. This is in the Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide for the Perplexed, section 3, chapter 32. It is contrary to man's nature that he should suddenly abandon all the different kinds of service and like serving Hashem in different ways and changing his mindset. Just as a person trained to work as a slave with mortar and bricks or similar things should interrupt his work, clean his hands, just wash your hands, and at once fight with real giants. Like you're a slave, okay, wash your hands. Now you're free. Like I said in Sobibor, you're free now, go. You can't just flick the switch. It's not a matter, this mentality is not just, again, an intellectual thing. I'm doing this to explain what we'll see in the future. The sources will be so clear in a certain direction, like someone asked last night from the women, of how can it be that Rabbi so-and-so, this great Rabbi, doesn't see what you're saying, doesn't agree, doesn't. So we have to understand, to preempt these questions, how can it be that people still awaiting the supernatural redemption, therefore are very unappreciative, to put it mildly, either against or ignore what's taking place today? We'll see the redemption taking place in a slow developmental process, not complete, not perfect, not all holy, but understanding to appreciate the stages.
Those are Haredim, like a subsection of Haredim.
Okay, so why is it that they don't see what's obvious? So it's not a matter of IQ, not a matter of piety, not a matter of religious scholarship. There is a certain reality. Again, the first of all, we mentioned different reasons, and there's more to talk about. Like the sin of the spies. They were the giants of the generation that didn't see, that didn't want to come to Eretz Yisrael, had their reasons, explanations. So there's this phenomenon, there's a repeating phenomenon of the time of the redemption. There'll be this thing of that sometimes even rabbis and scholars won't see, won't want to participate, won't see what is seemingly obvious that you get up and do. The whole book is about that, right? He about himself, that he was raised Munkach Chassid, and he writes here I don't want to get to this because once we start here we won't of Tachtal, you know the book, you've all seen it. The great Rabbi in Hungary, they're ultimately hiding out during the Holocaust in Budapest in the attic, writing the whole book, pointing out that this is indeed the hand of God working through nature, through human beings, even though they're not religious, he's aware. This is 1943, the book came out during in Budapest. It's amazing how 19 not Tafshin Gimel. But he talks about himself, how I also, he says, we had this mentality of, what does he call it? The shave alta, sit back and wait. It's better to sit back and do nothing. And that's what we're talking about, why this developed, or how this developed. Again, it's not because of lack of belief, a lack of scholarship. The truth is, he didn't have any books when he was writing this. So how was he writing all this? In other words, all these things he knew before. He says, I was wrong, and we have to get up and do and participate. He talks about why we were so against the origins of the hatred towards the Zionists. Maybe I shouldn't get into this topic now because I wanted to go on, but so we had a question first.
I was going to say that the whole people waiting around for a redemption thing, it comes sort of from an overdependence of God, which sort of leads to you forfeiting your responsibilities. It comes back to that story of there's a flood and the guy
I'll get to that.
and the
We'll get
and
to
the
that
boat
story,
comes
right?
and the
Right.
helicopter
God sent him
comes.
a boat and a helicopter. I'm waiting for God. That's what we'll get to when we get to another source that talks more explicitly about that. But yes, that's the. But again, what I'm trying to say is, and I'm trying to be careful because again, we're talking about these big rabbis. It's not only what you call. There's not only extreme groups. There's many still that have this, what he said, this perception of not understanding the significance of who needs a nation, who needs a to return to nationhood. Again, we all believe in that. It's all in the books. It's all we pray for the return to Zion. But in life, that these concepts are living concepts, not intellectual, not in the book. And that's we'll see. I wanted to get to the next source of how it becomes this transition, this revolution. That now there's a nation, there's a waking up of a national awareness and consciousness that didn't exist until now. Again, the Jews knew, but Judaism or religion was relegated to the individual domain. What the Gemara says in Brachot, page 8a, that God only has his 4 cubits of halakha. In the temple destroyed, in the exile, the 4 cubits is like the individual domain, right? On Shabbat, you're allowed to carry. This is like what's called the 4 cubits of halakha. What we call the private life. Judaism in the kashrut, in the kitchen, keeping kosher, keeping Shabbat, in yeshiva, learning Torah. But to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, that didn't exist for 2,000 years. We didn't have that. Judaism became the individual, you and your mitzvot. That's one. Again, I want to bring you sources for this to elaborate on that topic. But first, I wanted to get to a little bit to understand. So this concept of this waiting for, this sitting back and this passivity and leaving it to God, like you said, the more you believe, the less you do. Like if you believe in God, you think he needs a boat and a plane and to buy an El Al and a Ben Gurion and Herzl. When he wants, he'll bring us back. But what about all the things that you're not supposed to rely on miracles, etc.? So again, intellectually, people know that. But when it came to this topic of the collective, of being rebuilding the nation, that became, like I said, otherworldly and other mystified. When it comes to making a living, you don't sit back. I believe in God. I'll wait. He talks about that. There's so much in this book. How you have to do all that you can do. He brings the Gemara, I think, in Nidah, page 70. That if you want a good wife, you want a good family, etc., you want a living, you have to go out and work, and to pray that God should help and give success in your efforts. But not that without efforts. The Gemara says, haba lo sagi. One without the other is not enough. You can't just say, I'll pray. It's in God's hands. It is in God's hands. But he requires your participation. And that we'll talk about when we get to those sources of the big question of hishtadlut and bitachon, faith in God and human efforts. What's the limit? What are the borders? How much we have to do? Do we have to do anything? But what you said, we'll hopefully get to what you said exactly. But more with the sources, I want to do it in development, believe it or not. There's a structure here to get to this understanding, the build-up of, to understand this more properly and fully. But I just wanted to, again, to preempt the questions and the difficulties, that it's not because those that disagree or don't see, it's not because of a lack of learning or study. Like we're smarter, I'm smarter than them. This is again, there's also a hashgacha, an element of God's guidance in this topic. But so maybe I will read now this source, if we already got to this topic. There's only 6. It's in Hebrew. Maybe I'll just, those who can read the Hebrew, I appreciate it. This is from a book by Talei Chaim, by the Rav Chaim Cohen, died 1 or 2 years ago. One of the I call it Mekubalim generation, and also Reuven Sasson, Shlita, a younger very writing also these books of Talei Chaim with deeper understandings of the Torah and the Parshat HaShavua. They have volumes and volumes on the holidays. But this is about the redemption.
Rabbi,
And here it,
a suggestion quickly. This reminds me of this idea of people not really getting up and doing things, just or being very passive. This reminds me of a different shiur we're learning in Navi and Ezra, and that when Ezra ascended to Israel after the declaration of Cyrus, the Navi, the states over there, in wording that there were a group of people who didn't go, not because they couldn't, but because they didn't have this courage or this determination in them to just stop, leave everything, and get up and go.
but that's what we read in the Bootmacher. Remember? The second source here.
Okay, I wasn't there.
The Babylonian exile, though destined to last no more than 70 years. The prophet says 70 years you can be in exile. So what can you do after 70 years? You can really be passive because God has to fulfill the prophecy. There's a prophecy going to come back. So here you can really rely on God. He has no choice. A positive prophecy has to be fulfilled. The negative you can God fix.
And that's what they did. They all gave up.
Right, they didn't even try. So he says here, it still required the practical leadership of Daniel, Ezra, and Nehemiah to achieve a significant return to Eretz Yisrael. Unlike many of our own contemporaries, they did not say, Ezra and Nehemiah, right? Didn't say, the others did. Every man remain in his place, redemption will come of itself. So what can we say about it now? But again, it's this source quickly, it's mainly what I've been talking about, but it's this topic of it's not only the miraculous as opposed to the natural, the expectation of the miracle, it's also the topic of the klal and the prat, the individual. Like I said, Judaism was relegated to the individual level. That's all there was. Right, I have that Los Angeles Times article. There's nothing an Orthodox Jew needs that isn't here. We have everything we want, everything we need. What about the Beit HaMikdash, the Eretz Yisrael, all the mitzvot that depend on the land, and not only that, all the mitzvot, it says even the mitzvot outside the land are just for the rehearsal, so it won't be new to you to come back to Eretz Yisrael. So the true significance, the fullness of Judaism, be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And you're down to the individual level, like Yechezkel 36, right? We'll see the sources that he calls that a desecration of God's name. What do you mean? You have everything you need here. They have pictures there. That woman and the mikveh. They have not in the mikveh, next to the mikveh, and they have the kosher food and kosher everything, kosher pico deli, etc. What are we missing here? So the understanding that the concept of the cloud, the collective, the significance of nationhood, again, 2,000 years has its effect on the mind, on the mindset. It's again, it's something we're praying for in the future, but it's not something of life that you do that we need. We're lacking. We're missing this dimension of total Judaism. If you tie your hand back for a day or two, the muscles get used to the situation. And what the rabbis call teva, it becomes teva sheni, second nature. Even to go back to it, like to free the hand from the shackles, to go back to it will take an effort, will feel uncomfortable. This is the norm. This standing on our head for 2,000 years, this lack of Judaism on the individual level, that becomes Judaism, religiosity. The mitzvot, you do what it says in the books. What we'll see, I'm saying ahead of time, but I should do it in proper order, but it's hard to, time limitation here. What we're coming back to will be this level of not Torah that you do because the book says so, but it comes from within. Torah is not some external book that we follow, a codex of laws customs and laws that we have to listen to what God says, and we have life, and there's Torah, and we succumb to God's will, which is true. We have to do God's will. That is, but how it's part of our essence. That's our nature. That's our inner neshama demands and requires and wants that. It's normal to be healthy. To want you get hungry, right? You need to eat. You're tired. You sleep. It's a natural thing. You don't need the book to tell you you're supposed to breathe. You don't need the book to tell you you should eat when you're hungry. But in Torah, the mitzvah, the spiritual side of us, we have free will, and there it is. We don't feel it naturally. We have this block between our inner nature and our consciousness, let's call it, our free will. That's what enables the free will, that you can choose. And you have to realize this is true, this is better, God knows best, and do what is normal and healthy for us. But as you know, the Father has kept the Torah before it was given. And in the future, we're going to come back to this super level of Torah as nature. Not because the book says, because how can you not? In other words, all the details, Shabbat, Kashrut, you'll be living Torah. In other words, not an external behavioralistic training of doing what the book says, which again, on this level for 2,000 years, that's what we have to do. But the future level is coming back to Torah as nature, as an inner, you have no desire to do otherwise, to do evil, to do bad, to do that which is wrong. You have the Ramban there on the Torah, the Ramban, Nachmanides, the blue, I think they're blue volumes. Who knows the library?
Shmos.
No, on Deuteronomy. Ramban. You have it? So anyway, what I want to get to, and we'll see it next week, the source. But the other side of the coin is this revolution that takes place, that this nation wakes up again. I'll just read it quickly, even though you don't have the sheet. The Orach Chaim becomes right. Redemption is self-awakening. Redemption will start with stirring in men's hearts. There'll be an awakening. That's what we call the natural redemption, not from some external God picking us up and bringing us back to that. There'll be this inner awakening, this inner infusion of divinity, of godliness, of awareness, of consciousness, to be a nation again, to want to live it, but not because the book says. But it says here, you'll feel straight, for living in a strange land. What are we doing outside of Eretz Yisrael? But that'll come back as a normal, natural, instinctive drive. And we'll talk about the stages, how it comes back. It's not automatic. Hey, I want to be religious and holy, to be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. Well, there's stages coming back. We mentioned that in Elul, right? Coming back to be a nation again, and coming back to a land. It could be Uganda, and then again in Eretz Yisrael without Torah, and then ultimately in a land of Eretz Yisrael with Torah, with Mitzvot. But again, the point is that this process leads to coming back to Torah and Mitzvot, not as the book says, and therefore we succumb to do so, and listen to the Torah. But from within, Torah becomes natural, becomes normal, becomes what it really is, our nature, our essence, and we live accordingly. It's a total different dimension, not coming back to after this detour of being secular, after enlightenment, emancipation, whatever. The Jews were secular, and we're going to come back to being religious again. It's coming back in a total different dimension. Like on Shabbat, we have a Neshama Yetera. This is a divinely infused energy level. If you know how to use it properly, if you do the mitzvot and keep Shabbat and the minhagim and the customs and the meals and the singing, that helps to bring out and make you more in contact with that energy that you were now energized with. But that's the reality. Whether you believe it or not, whether you know it or not. At the time of the redemption, as we'll see, there's this energy, this neshama yetera, that the Vilna Gaon says. It's like this infused divine awakening that is instilled in us. Not caused by Herzl, but the opposite. They're the results that God infuses this new spirit, this stirring in men's hearts. It's from Hashem, but it reveals itself. Men are waking up to do and wanting, but how are they wanting to do? Not because it says in the book. They threw away the book. Not because it says mitzvah number 4, the Ramban, that's a commandment to live in Eretz Yisrael. They threw away the Ramban. Not because it says in Yechezkel 36, the process of redemption, coming back to the land, Yechezkel 37, the dry boat. They threw away all the book. They don't believe in all that. But they're coming life level. Their life level is now, we need to come back. There's a stirring to come back, this need. What are we doing outside? This natural force that drives them to be part of this national enterprise, to sacrifice their lives, to dry up the swamps, malaria-ridden swamps, to go up, that other Jews can come back, to help rebuild the nation. Where'd you get that from? You don't even believe in God. You don't believe in the redemption. But it's this inner, like some people call it subconscious, more with the super conscious level, this divine infusion. And that's, he brings it down in Ibn Shechai. I can't read all the sources now. So for now, we'll just take it on surface. I'll bring you the sources as we go on, hopefully. I'll give you the pages where this is all written. But this is a divinely inspired process. Even though the participants themselves are not aware of the source. They don't say, wow, yes, God is bringing me back. I'm in this new neshama. I feel this surgence of national consciousness and awareness. I want to be part of the nation, to build a nation. It's, again, the superconscious, like the subconscious. You're not aware of the source, but this is what's pushing from within. As the process goes on, we become more aware. Like we mentioned, this unpeeling of the shell. The first level, like it's coming back to nationhood as a natural instinctual drive, and then to the land, etc., to Torah mitzvot. It's revealed at the end what was pushing from the beginning. All the time, this neshama, like the baby, born from day one, he has this neshama. He's not aware of it. He's growing, the motor development, the body is developing. And he doesn't know he's doing the mitzvot yet, till the bar mitzvah doesn't put on tefillin. That's how it goes. First, the development of the external side, and then more and more the domination, the neshama becomes more dominant and more exposed and revealed, until you have this holy, healthy human being. That is like what we say on Shabbat and the Chadodi, that process of last in deed, first in thought. Where do we say that? Sof Maaseh b'machshavat tchila. At the end of the process is revealed what was pushing from the beginning. It's not like at the end of the process, Jews come back to Israel, then there's the neshama. There's some new spirituality revealed. It is, so to speak, but no, it was from the beginning pushing. That's what's the source of the whole process. They're not aware of it. They're just being, like I said, the child is growing. Who's pushing it? The neshama is pushing you. He's just growing and playing ball and developing his muscles. But that's all how the neshama prepares the vessel, the vehicle, to reveal itself. But first you have to build the physical side. That's what the rabbis say in the Musaf prayer. How do we say Musaf on Shabbat? Tikanta, Shabbat. What's the pattern there? Take the first letter of those words. Any pattern? Tikanta, Shabbat, Tashrak. Goes to the, what's Tashrak? You've seen that in the Piyutim and different things. Backwards Aleph Bet, like it goes from Z to A, from Tav to Aleph. The backwards Aleph Bet. Rabbis explain the Tur, Shulchan Aruch on that, on the laws of the Musaf prayer and Shabbat. He says that's the secret of the redemption, Tashrak. That's one of the keys of understanding. The Tashrak, in other words, I'm doing this quickly, it needs more exploration, but you have to forgive me. It's so hard to put it into a few minutes. The process of redemption comes in this way of from the bottom up, from the external, from the body, the physical, the nationhood, the army, government, all that physical, how to say, national infrastructure, whatever, the physical side, and then Shin Reish Kuf, and then it gets to reveal at the end, Sof Ma'aseh Machshabat, at the end is revealed what was pushing the whole process, the significance, the true essence of that process, of that building, was the neshama, the aleph, the one, the divine essence of all that. That was pushing from the beginning. They weren't aware of that. That's where we come in. Our goal is to understand what's developing here, what's in that child. He's not just a body, a bunch of meat. The guy says, right, the women told by the prophet, you're going to have a son, he's going to be a rabbi, a scholar. The baby's born after all these problems and difficulties, and we'll get to that metaphor later. The baby's born, she brings the Gemara, and start learning. What? He starts ripping the pages, playing with the kids ever did that? Rip up the pages. What do you mean? You're supposed to be a Talmid Chacham. They told me you're Again, there's a process, the developmental process of how these things develop and why they develop is another thing. Why God, that will get to us. But this process of it starts from the physical. Just like when each one of us, we mentioned this. No, we didn't mention it. Someone else on Friday, on Shabbat. Just like each one of us, we're all born, right? And we start with the physical development, the motor development, and then the spiritual. Just like the Adam Rishon, was created first from the dust of the earth, and then then blown into him the neshama of life. Just like the Jewish people, how was the stage of development? In Egypt, we have Pesach. We commemorate the physical freedom, to be free from slavery, physical freedom. And then at Shavuot, receiving the Torah, the content, the essence of what to do with that body. And then coming to Eretz Yisrael and Sukkot, the ultimate manifestation of that divine ideal in reality in the physical nation. But that's how it goes also, Yechezkel 36 and 37, we'll see the dry bones prophecy, the Jews come back, the bones come back, and it says, V'ruach ein behem, and there's no spirituality. It's just a bunch of people coming back to building a land again. What's that? A flag at the UN? What's that meaning? We're waiting for God. We're waiting for a kingdom of priests, and this is just another secular, anti-religious even nation. Very disappointed. But that's how it says. At first they come back, and there seems to be no spirit, and then the next stage is the revealing of the neshama that was pushing behind all this and the real meaning of all that. But if those are looking for again, all at once, all perfect, it's either all or nothing. So they'll see the stages. They'll see stage one and be very disappointed. This is nothing, because it's not all. But that's why this understanding and the study of this is very important, to understand the ways of God and why it's this way, to appreciate and to work with God, to know how to relate to it. Again, to yell, to scream, to reject, or at best to ignore, or to understand what is developing here, that child that is developing. And yes, there's a book, one of the Rishonim, Seder Hayom, of Machir, of how, like it says in the Mishnah, Pirkei Avot, of 5 years old to learn Mikra, and then Talmud, whatever. Mishnah, there's an order. Why not give him everything? Why not give him quantum mechanics at age 1 if he can do it? No, there's an order of development. There's a person in the neighborhood that it's a psychological factor, whatever. That children that skip the crawling stage. And chaval, if the kid can walk, why you don't have to waste your time? Let him walk right away. But later that causes certain mental disabilities, and later the parents have to go and try to crawl with him at an older age to try to, to salvage whatever could be attained from that crawling stage. Seeing the world from that dimension is an important stage before to getting up. Each stage has its significance. In other words, each stage is an important block upon which the later stages are built. You take off those blocks and think, we don't need that. Go right, the miraculous right away, bring him to the final thing. No, each thing, the reasons of the redemption coming this way to elevate all of the reality, all of nature, all of the world. The goal requires this totality of all. Nothing is left behind. Even nature is not left behind. And all these movements and maneuverings, history itself participates to bring about this final thing, which shows the total oneness of God, the totality of this goal. You wanted to say?
Yeah, my question is, it seems like, as you're talking about stages, that just as the case of a child, we missed some things. We should have been preparing, just as though an 8-year-old may not be chayav mitzvot, you'd still be teaching them some things, so someday when they're bar mitzvah, they'll already be doing it. They won't
Right.
be saying, oh, now I'm bar mitzvah, now I need to
Right,
go
you
learn.
prepare.
It seems like we certainly missed some stages along the way about before coming back, hundreds, that we weren't studying things that maybe should have been studied.
Okay, we're still
But
paying
then,
the
but
price.
then, I'm going to take a forward-looking stance on that, proactive stance. Are there things that we're not studying now that we should be studying for the next stage, so we'll be better prepared for the next
And
stage of
that's why we're
redemption?
studying. There's certain things. Rav Kook had a call to study what I call the bigger picture of Torah, the full picture, the called the spiritual side of Torah. We mentioned that in introduction. Those who were here for the introduction, that's why I said I'm trying to build up here. Each thing is not just. I'm trying to do it in a way that builds up this understanding, this total concept of this holistic view that coming back to the total Torah that was ignored, was neglected. Look at the introduction to the path of the just. Look at the introduction to the duties of the heart. This lack of study, they think that you have to learn the do's and don'ts, which again, we mentioned, it can take a lifetime just learning the laws of Shabbat, of Kashrut. But there's a time when you have to learn, well, that's good for the first grader, second grader, but there's a time when you have to, like you said, to learn where you're going, the meaning, the significance, the grandeur, the beauty, the divine content of all of this, to fill you with, not just to get you religious, like people use that Jewish philosophy in order to get you to do the mitzvot. Like the goal is just to do the practitioner of the mitzvot, and all the other things are just embellishment, whatever, that convince you to be religious. But here, what we call the spiritual side of Torah, the neshama, what the rabbis call the soul of Torah. There's the body of Torah, like it says in Pirkei Avot, the gufei Torah, and there's the neshama of Torah, the wine, they call it, that gives the taste, the meaning, the grandeur. And God wants us to, not because we do the mitzvah, because we understand. We spoke about this, but we don't get conditional. What I understand, I'll do. If not, not. But God wants us to understand as much. He gave us the brain. He doesn't want robots. He has angels that do His will without questioning, without understanding. But our goal is He gave us a mind to understand and to identify, to do it with fervor, with love, with connection, with the whole body, with the whole soul, and not just again, like submit. And that in the future, the rabbis forewarned, and the Tikkun Zohar brings down that the Torah will become dry. Just the do's and don'ts, without this identification, without the understanding, without seeing the beauty, at least in general. You learn Nefesh HaChaim and other stuff, that you see the beauty, the significance of it. Without that, it becomes dry and empty, and then there'll be an abandonment. Because I want the bigger things of changing the world, fixing society, communism, socialism, and you tell me not to mix my meat and milk spoons. The problem is what they're looking for to make a better world, like Taken Olam Malchut Shaddai, depends on Dafka, the Torah and the mitzvot, these tiny things that are connected to and bring about the bettering of the world way beyond any other isms that man can think of. But they have no idea of that. They just think it's just dry, just do these acts or else. We mentioned that. So of course, there's a lot of study that we've been lacking. And like I said, the rabbis have called for that, crying about that for years, not just recently. He says throughout, like I said, the path of the just was not just, but we mentioned in the introduction of why it was neglected. Again, it wasn't so relevant, or how God will bring the redemption, how this future is, how God works in history. But now it's a necessity. Now it's a matter of how to understand what God is doing and how to appreciate it and how to work with it. But again, I don't want to repeat the introduction. We explained different reasons of why this study is so important and why it was neglected. What I wanted to get to this sheet, we're not going to get to today. So pass it back. We'll get to it next week. Of the significance, again, I just want the last two things of, just to summarize, this learned helplessness, so to speak. The reality was such that these two topics, it became more the mystification of the redemption process, of coming back to the land, which seems so otherworldly, impossible any other way. And the second thing of the klal and the prat, the focus on the individual. Judaism became this ritualistic, the individual format, and the whole idea of nationhood, of Jewish sovereignty, was so far away from our mindset that it's something, again, we don't need it. Like I said, Los Angeles time, we have Judaism, while we need here in LA, or it was relegated to some futuristic thing. But meanwhile, Hilchot to the Mashiach. When the Mashiach comes, we'll have that. But meanwhile, Judaism is flourishing, and we have what we have, what we need. This is all there is. And he talks here about this phenomenon of why this takes place. This is called the slumber. Those are the Sfardim here that read Tikkun Petach Eliyahu from the Tikkun Zohar in the beginning before the prayers. How this is called the slumber. The galut is the slumber. This national soul, this collective soul is absent because the Shema. So I have to just one more word. when the collective soul, the Shekhinah, is present, then all the parts of the body, all the limbs are working as one and recognize themselves and feel that they're a limb in this collective whole. When the neshama, it goes up, when the Jews are in exile, the fractured soul, so to speak, the body, the Shekhinah is in exile. And the Shekhinah is no longer present. There's no unifying force. There's no conductor to the orchestra. You have all these instruments, and they see themselves as separate and individual, living on their own, worried about and concerned with their individual physical and spiritual perfection and completion. That's the situation of the exile. That's described by the rabbis. The sources talk about. That's the tragedy of Galut, that we're broken to the individual. Like I said, the 4 cubits of halacha. Each one is now on their own. Judaism is now seen as an individualistic religion. Each one in their commandments, but not because they're not aware of. They don't read the books about the nation of Israel. But the reality is that the neshama, this unifying force, is not present. There is no one, this magnet, that central magnet that causes all the limbs to realize and feel that we're part of one. My whole life is to give to and be part of and to add my special contribution to this collective whole, to the Shekhinah, to the divine presence, Knesset Israel. And that's what we mentioned. That's the Chidush, what's taking place in the last few hundred years, the return of the Shema. And now the Jews are feeling this instinctive, natural, like I called it before, a national awareness and consciousness that we're part of a bigger whole. And that's what we'll see next week. I'm going to keep you over for Mincha. There's much more to come.
Thank you, Rabbi Kaplan. This is wonderful.
It's hard to do.
Oh, it's great.
All the questions, love to answer them.
Want me to do it?
Sorry if you, again, coming in the middle, it's hard to, as you know, there's so much, I don't know how Nachman does in a few minutes, but that's what